welcome everybody to another episode of Hot Program. I am your host with the most, all the way from the East Coast, and as always, folks, I am in airplane mode, and now a man who thought carnitas was the Spanish word for car wash, a man who needs no introduction. How you doing today?
Yeah. I'm fantastic. And yourself?
I'm all right.
Good.
So we're talking today about guns and why are Americans so obsessed with them. And I think it's gonna be interesting because it's got the whole, it's not what you expect in parentheses. So I'm imagining there's some sort of history lesson or payoff that's gonna be kind of an interesting discussion here. It got me thinking a little bit, and for some reason I started with the Second Amendment, and there was a bit I found, and I was trying to think about like the exceptionalism of it. All right, so check this out.
Can you put the Second Amendment up on the screen and read it for our viewers?
Yeah, that's actually probably a good idea. Hang on first, because you're not doing the right screen there. You need this other screen. All right. So, yeah, let's start with the Second Amendment, I guess.
Turns out we needed more than two.
All right. There it is. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. All right. And then this thing.
Keep this tab. Please keep this tab. Because notice, can you go back to it real quick? Notice this is being necessary to the security of a free state. Because we may want to circle back and ask ourselves, how secure do those kids feel in school? How secure do people feel when they go to a shopping mall or to a club? Do they feel secure? Do they still feel free?
Yeah. All right. So I looked this up, right? How many countries have gun rights enshrined in their constitutions? And American gun culture is exceptional, and that much we know. The United States has more guns than any other country, 300 million, more guns per person, 9 for every 10, and also the highest firearm homicide rate in the well-developed countries and the highest rate of unintentional firearm deaths. But what of the constitutional apparatus that sustains American gun culture? How exceptional is the Second Amendment, which protects the right of Americans to keep and bear arms? And this researcher explains it's actually quite unusual for gun rights to be included in a constitution. In our historical study of constitutions, my colleagues and I identified only 15 constitutions in 9 countries that had ever included an explicit right to bear arms. Almost all of these constitutions have been in Latin America, and most were from the 19th century. Only 3 countries, Guatemala, Mexico, and the United States, have a constitutional right to bear arms. Of the 15, ours is the only one that does not explicitly include a restrictive condition. Of course, many Americans and a minority of the Supreme Court believe that our, quote, militia clause amounts to one such a restriction, an interpretation the court rejected in 2008 when it ruled that the Second Amendment protected the individual right to bear arms. So I just want to say a couple things off the top that I realized a couple things along this process for me. First, I realized I don't hold the Constitution in the same regard other people do. Part of being an atheist is I don't believe there's any such thing as a sacred text. And I believe the Constitution was not written by people that I think can, create a structure for a successful modern society. And I don't think we should be beholden to them. I literally think it's religious. It's a holdover from religious thinking that makes us enshrine these founding fathers as authorities over us. And with that being said, I don't think there's anything special about the Second Amendment. And so when I started to think about this, getting into this episode today, I basically realized, to me, the Second Amendment is the problem. The Second Amendment is the problem, because that then becomes the framework that everything is interpreted under, right? It's like learned helplessness. Well, we should make more gun laws. Well, it would be great to protect the kids. But look at the Second Amendment, and it's sacred. It's like God came down and said, "Thou shalt not infringe on a person's." Imagine, gang, if that wasn't in the Constitution, and instead federal law and the laws of every state and city absolutely enshrined the government's ability to disarm the public. It was like, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. The government has every right to disarm people. Right? Like that, and that would be the framework we had to interpret shit through.
The Second Amendment is poorly written. It's very poorly written. I'm one of those people who think this is referring to those who are part of the militia. This is written at a time where it's essentially we know we need guns to kill deer and elk and things like that, and beavers, so we can eat. So to some degree clothe ourselves. It was part of having a gun could be part of your survival, and if you didn't have one, you might not survive. It's not to shoot.
So here's what's so interesting about that.
Well, hold on. In the event of a national emergency or a war, then or some civil unrest, right? A militia would be a good thing to have, where concerned citizens would gather together and work together as a unit to defend their community or the country at large. So it says a well-regulated militia. Well, guns aren't well-regulated right now in most states.
But yes, also, and there's no militias.
People aren't part of the militia right now. Yeah. So that's an issue. There are people who will say, well, we're a militia. Well, they're self-ordained.
Yeah. Here's the other thing. People will say, I'm pro Second Amendment because I believe people need to have guns for hunting and personal defense. And what I'm realizing, and this is no shade on people who think this way, but let's think through this. That's not what's enshrined in the Second Amendment, right? Right? The Second Amendment doesn't say anything about you having guns for sport or for personal, your defense of you, or for hunting. No, it's all about to maintain a well-regulated militia. So it's kind of just interesting how we use people need to have the right to keep and bear arms, and we use that to kind of smuggle in the logic, I'm pro Second Amendment because people need to have guns for hunting and self-defense. That's not what the Second Amendment's about. But that's optimistic for somebody like me, right? Because again, I don't think we should have the Second Amendment, right? I think we need to do exactly what we did with prohibition, which is make an amendment that gets rid of a previous amendment, right? But then think about this. Everybody that's so freaked out, like, but then I wouldn't be able to have a gun to protect my family, which, when was the last time you needed a gun to protect your family? Stop BSing. All right. And then on top of that, like, I'm not going to have a gun for hunting and da-da-da-da-da. Again, The Second Amendment already isn't protecting that. So I think actually it would be powerful, because think about it. We'd be able to then, just like now, have federal and local laws that regulate the use of firearms and the ownership of firearms for things like hunting, sport, and self-defense. And then we would no longer have this Second Amendment BS, and instead we make it very clear the government absolutely does have the right to. And guess what? Now that people keep shooting up schools with automatic rifles, we could just do so much great legislative stuff if we didn't have a Second Amendment. But anyway, I'm not going to make that about the episode. I want to jump into it. I'm going to let you finish that up. But I just want to tell people that's where I'm at. That's where I came to be at. Like, I think the Second Amendment is the problem. But anything else you want to throw before we jump in this?
Yeah,
go for it.
I think people should have the right to have some kinds of guns.
Yeah.
If there wasn't an amendment that said it, there should be one, in my opinion.
Oh, you think there should? I think we don't. I just don't think it needs to. Think about, like, why does everything need to be in the Constitution? We don't have a constitutional right to drive cars. We don't have a constitutional right to own computers.
No, it's a privilege.
Like, it's just so. To me, this should just be part of regular law. I mean, to me, putting it in the Constitution is the problem to me, because then it becomes too high level of a law. Like, I'm not opposed to it. I just don't think it needs to be there.
I think there should be certain restrictions. If you have a criminal record for violent crime, you shouldn't have a right to own a gun ever again. Assault weapons, utterly unnecessary. And I have heard people who are capable of completing paragraphs when they speak to you say, well, I should be able to have like an AR-15, an AK-47, and a 50 cal, because if this country ever becomes corrupt enough, I need to defend myself. And I'm thinking, the military has planes, tanks, bombs, and drones.
Yeah, this is like
you stand absolutely no chance of defending yourself unless you never show anybody you have those weapons.
Yeah, I think you're with me.
If you want to defend yourself, you have the better argument.
Yeah, I think you're with me.
I
think you're with me, because
but look, again, my fiance, we have I told her there's a list of wedding gifts. Like, she can just have whatever she wants. I don't care. And on that list is a firearm. So I got my buddy who's a professional. He competes as a shooter. He'll train her. My best friend's son, he does firearms training. He is volunteered to train her as well. I got a neighbor who has a former sheriff's deputy. Well, he was a sheriff, I think. He said he'd train her. So I've got people in my life that will show her what to do once she gets a gun in her hand. She's not gonna be uninformed, but that's something she wanted. When I told her what the topic was, she specifically said she comes from a country where the people don't have that. And she's saying, like, you have to understand how important this is. So that's somebody on the outside looking in.
Right, and I often think that's like, because in a lot of those countries, sometimes they're overrun. Sometimes it's one or the other, right? Either they're overrun with tyrannical governments, but the people don't have any actual authority or ability to defend themselves, or the criminal element is able to outgun the civil authorities and the people as well, and so it depends on what nation you're looking at. But where I'm saying is, and it doesn't matter, because it's not going to happen, right? Because let's just face it, the Second Amendment is like, it's permanently enshrined, and people will go to war. They will actually have a civil war before they let the Constitution not have a Second Amendment. But my point is, if we actually got rid of it, I'm not saying we would get rid of gun ownership. What I'm saying is, all of those things we talk about, restricting assault rifles, making sure people have training, making sure they carry insurance, of that.
Insurance, yes. Training, no.
What do you mean training? No.
And I'll tell you why. So I've been at gunpoint a few times in my life. Each time It was 3 times I remember for sure. The 4th time I'm kind of fuzzy on. It was by Los Angeles Police Department. 3 separate occasions, 3 separate years, 3 separate communities, okay? I was told by someone who is in law enforcement, the worst trained law enforcement people in the state of California are the California Highway Patrol. They said if a CHP officer is shooting at you, you're probably going to be fine because they can't hit the broadside of a barn. Exact quote. If you take the average gun owner, let's just say the average unstable gun owner who will use their gun as a solution to where words would clearly solve the issue, they'll use their gun instead. If that person is well trained, they're more deadly. If these school shooters were well trained, they're more deadly.
I don't.
So I'd say
but
absolutely
people, but it's like a car. Like it's like a thing that you should
I'll
have to have
agree. I like
insurance
your
for,
insurance.
and then it's
I
and then.
like that.
But so then to drive a car, we make you take a written exam, and then we actually make you take a field exam. Like you have to actually demonstrate that you can use a car, because otherwise you're not gonna get people on gun safety unless they actually have an education in it.
I don't want better killers.
But then you should be anti-gun.
No, because there are people who can use a gun responsibly.
Okay, but so then you should want gun users to use it responsibly to be effective.
I don't want it mandatory though, because if it's mandatory,
okay, we can figure out mandatory later. But this is exactly my point: is we can't actually get any. Like literally, we can figure out training later, but we can't do any of this so long as we have a Second Amendment that is continuously going to be interpreted as the government can't take your right to use a firearm, because it's preventing it's preventing us from actually doing the regulation that we need to do. That's all.
Well, but they've regulated assault weapons before. That's happened in the United States of America. There have been assault weapons banned. I'd be willing to say we're on the verge of a new assault weapons ban. We should be. I think it's long
overdue. We can definitely get gun regulation without getting rid of the Second Amendment. I just think it'd be a hell of a lot easier. And it's just a thing I started thinking about the last couple of days.
Okay.
Because I just realized, like, why don't I care? And I just realized people keep talking to me about the Second Amendment. I finally was, oh yeah, I don't care. I need to just tell people I don't care. Like I don't even, like I literally don't care. Like I do not think people, and also I did a bit of reading for this, and it turns out that basically there's a history where the interpretation that the Supreme Court is upholding is Scalia's opinion that basically the right to bear arms predates the Constitution, basically, because it goes back to like before the first Congress.
Slavery.
Because it's basically based on the right to own firearms that was established in England to make sure Protestants remained armed. So once I found that out too, like when I really realized that this is literally the history of this is literally making sure Protestants are armed so that, you know, they can overthrow the government. I was like, yeah, this isn't, you're not going to get me on board with enshrining this particular right. Like, I get it, people have it, but it wouldn't make the cut in my constitutional convention. And then I would just leave it up to state and federal law, like everything, like all these other countries do. This is what all of Europe does, right? None of all these countries we talk about, they have a lot of gun ownership. They just don't have to put it in their damn constitutions.
Let me ask you: have you ever fired a gun? Not a BB gun.
Nope, no desire to.
No desire to. Okay, I have.
Yeah.
I encourage everyone to do what I did. Some friends and I, we were trying to make plans for a weekend, and somebody suggested, let's go to the gun range. Little did I know my friends had guns, and I didn't happen to have a gun, never had one. So we went, and I walked in there very humbly, said to the staff, what are your procedures for being safe here? And they looked at me like no one had ever come in there and said that before. And the lady who ended up being my trainer for the day, she goes, no one has ever asked us that question before. No one.
Yeah.
Well, how the heck am I supposed to know? So they brief, hey, never walk around in here with a loaded gun. They give you a little tray. You put the gun on the tray. The clips over here. The bullets are laying around. All that stuff. So nobody feels threatened with what you have. Anyway, so they said, "What do you want to learn to shoot?" So I went through the display case of guns they had to rent, and I sort of pointed a few things out. And there was like a Glock, a revolver, a shotgun, a rifle, and a machine gun. So I had the charcuterie tray of
Right.
firearms to go in there with. And one after one, I was shown what to do and given some time to just, here's some targets. I didn't want to shoot at a target that was shaped like a person. I'll tell you about that later. And what I quickly learned, thinking, well, the revolver is probably going to be the one that I'm most natural with. Not true. I could not hit the broadside of a barn with a revolver. Just no. If I'd have thrown the gun, I might have been able to hit the target, but shooting it, just utter fail. The Glock, same thing. I think I'm doing what they're telling me. I hit the target, no bullseye, nothing like that, nothing to write home about. Shotgun, all it does is just destroy things. You could have a chicken shoot a shotgun and it would hit something. So then the rifle, no good at that. And I had shot I worked at a ranch and I had to shoot with the BB gun the birds that were in the barn. I think I just put holes in the roof and scared the birds. I don't think I ever hit one. So when it came time for the machine gun, the instructor was with me and she goes, "Okay, have you ever shot one of these before?" I'm like, "Ma'am, I never shot anything like this stuff before that you showed me today." She goes, "Okay, well, this you have to be extremely careful because this is really dangerous." And I'm thinking they were all dangerous. And she goes, "Here's the safety on this. I'm going to show you how to load it." So she showed me how to load it. I loaded the thing. And she goes, "Okay, now we need a target for you." And I said, "Okay, well, I don't want to use this target. It's a person." She goes, "But it's Osama bin Laden." "Well, I'll shoot him." "Okay, fine." So she starts to explain to me what to do. I pick the gun up before she's finished, and I fire one shot when she says, "Shoot him in the head," because she sees I'm about to do it. So I shot him in the head. 1, 2, 3, right in the head. Shoot him in the chest. 1, 2, 3, right in the chest. I put the safety back on it and I sit it down and I step away. She says, "I've never seen anybody do that before." And I says, "Take it away, please. Because I'm done." Now, I have proven that day I'm rubbish with all these. The best I've ever done with a gun is, score pretty highly on Duck Hunt on my Nintendo. You don't have to be skilled with one of those machine guns to be dangerous with one of those machine guns.
Yeah, and
that's why those school shooters show up, and the mall shooters and the club shooters. That's why they show up with those kinds of guns, because they could be crap and still be effective.
Yeah, no one needs to own them. And honestly, I think most guns should be there. You should shoot them at the range. That you go to a facility, we create places for that. Just like we create places where you can safely go on a roller coaster, and we create safe places where you can safely use a pottery wheel. People people could say this. Look, I would tell people this: grow up. If you wanted me, first off, I'm never going to support gun rights. Let's be clear. I don't have the right to use a firearm because of my medical history. So I'm not a vote, gang. I'm just a no vote. I'm never going to support people having a right that I don't have. And the way people talk about restricting the gun rights of people like me who are actually the targets of violence is just laughable. So I'm like, wow, okay, y'all gonna two-step like that in my face? You could dip with your gun rights. But setting all that aside, it just is something people have demonstrated we can't handle. And I'm just not one of these people. Again, I don't believe in sacred text. To me, we've demonstrated far beyond my satisfaction that we need to radically transform our government and our gun culture up to and including, to me, the Second Amendment. And if people wanted to really hold their gun rights to be sacred, they should have been more responsible with them.
Look, but you don't control. You're for the legalization of marijuana, pocket law.
Sure.
You don't control who uses it.
Right.
If I have an 8-year-old son, do you want my 8-year-old son using it?
Nope.
Okay. So you have a standard which you like. I think that's okay for guns, but there are people like yourself, you would say you use it responsibly, yes?
Sure. But look at the body count.
But should I take it away from you, or should I realize there are disciplined people who respect the power of what they are using and will use it appropriately and not abuse it?
But are you suggesting then that we have a constitutional amendment enshrining our right to use marijuana? Suggesting that the government can't take it away from us? But this is what I'm saying, right?
I'm just saying the culture. For all I care, it's like alcohol. In my view, you know what? Go ahead and smoke your marijuana. I got all sorts of stuff growing in my yard, like flowers and trees and stuff like that. None of it's illegal, but I don't think you should be prohibited. If I wanted to grow tobacco back there, I don't think I should be prohibited from doing that.
I don't either. I just think the government should have the right to disarm the people. That's it. Like, I'm not saying I'm against responsible gun ownership. I don't think it needs to be in the Constitution. I think we've made that point, right? That was the point. It was like, wow, I realize our Constitution is actually exceptional, gang, right? Like, it's genuinely exceptional. Most of the civilized world does not have an equivalent to the Second Amendment, and they seem to be getting by, right? And even countries with the biggest militaries and the most advanced, like they just don't seem to need a Second Amendment. And if we're genuinely going to talk about our gun culture, we might want to acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is we interpret everything through the framework of an inalienable right to own firearms. And that is very different than how we treat any other thing in our lives, right? What do we have at most? 19 amendments. How many of them are actually about? I think. Yeah. All right. 25. Oh, sorry, this is gross. But all right. But how many of them are actually related to particular things you can or can't have, right? Very few of them. So that's just kind of what I'm getting at, is I'm realizing the Second Amendment itself is a huge part of the culture. And it is something that most of the rest of the world probably thinks is pretty weird.
Okay, there's 27 amendments, by the way.
27. I don't, again, gang, I don't care about the Constitution. Let's be clear about that. All right, let's roll some tape.
Introducing my brand new course, Catalyst Academy. Growth advantages will ever be, and I love Thursday, a city. He had driven there to point now before it's too late. On the evening of April 13th, a 16-year-old black boy named Ralph Yarl approached a house in a residential neighborhood of Kansas City. He had driven there to pick up his younger brothers, twins, who had been spending time at a friend's house. According to Ralph, he rang the doorbell and waited. An 84-year-old white man opened the door and shot him in the head, and then again in the arm, as Ralph fled the scene. He had gotten the address wrong. A few days later, and hundreds of miles away on the night of April 15th in rural upstate New York, a car full of friends pulled into a driveway thinking it belonged to a friend they were attempting to visit. When they realized they were at the wrong address, they turned around and began driving away from the house. A man came out, pointed a gun at the car, and opened fire. A woman riding in the car was shot, and by the time her friends were able to get cell service and call the police, she was dead. Around midnight on April 18th, in a grocery store parking lot, a group of elite cheerleaders had just finished a grueling day of competition and were meeting in the parking lot to drive home. One girl opened a car door thinking it was her vehicle, only to find a man sitting in the car. When she realized her mistake, she immediately retreated to her friend's vehicle. The man, who had been sitting there in the car, left the vehicle, approached the cheerleaders, and opened fire, injuring two of them before they were able to flee. The shooters in the first two incidents have pled not guilty, and this has reignited a frequent debate around gun laws in America related to stand your ground laws and the entrenched idea of self-defense via the use of guns as inherently protected by the Second Amendment of our Constitution. Despite the fervor with which gun rights activists proclaim that their right to self-defense is ordained by the Second Amendment, that interpretation is relatively new. And despite the fact that America has the highest rate of gun deaths per capita of any similarly situated country, highest by a mile, including both individual homicides and suicides, as well as mass shootings, as a country we are bitterly divided over gun control or doing anything at all to curb this violence. So I wanted to take some time and try to answer the age-old question. Why are Americans so obsessed with guns? Roll the intro.
It is a hell of a question, gang. All right. We got the good production.
I think I got the answer to that, or one of the answers. I think there are quite a few.
You want to do it now, or you want to see what she's saying?
I'll say it now. People don't feel powerful. And the gun is a way for them to display their power. I think they misunderstand that the reach of that power. Let's say a lot of people. I have a friend who I haven't talked to him in a while. Actually, he sort of fell off the face of the earth. Who was a Vietnam vet, and one day he and I were driving someplace, and he started telling me about it, and he started crying. He had I forget how many people he said he killed. He said he killed a lot of people during the war, and he's crying. This had to be, when was that? Like 2013 or so? And he was still crying about it. He still hadn't reconciled what he was done. Now he's authorized. He's saving lives, right? He has to take a life to save lives. He understands that. And he had to do that. I met up with this guy who had been in an altercation, I think it was in Arizona or New Mexico, where someone was in an argument with him in a diner. And the guy told him, I'm going out to my car to get my gun. So he went out to his car to get his gun. The guy who went to get his gun first fired on him and missed. This dude had military training. It was no contest. One shot right there. The dude went down. One of my friends from elementary, middle, and high school, former military guy, somebody in my neighborhood that I lived in back in Indiana, one of my neighborhoods, robbed him. And he wanted his wallet back. He said, stop. And the guy just kept on running. The guy turned around finally, and my friend, pow, shot him right there. So all three people had remorse, right? You could say that all three people were justified in their use of firearms. All three people had a reason to defend themselves, their property, their life, whatever, however you want to phrase it. I'll agree. To me, listening to all three of them, they did.
I don't think you should have the right to shoot somebody to save your wallet, but okay.
You know, let me ask you something. You have a home invasion pocket locker.
Yeah, I actually, right? To be honest, I think even that, like, I got to be so honest with you. I think even first off, I think we just got to wake up to the reality. First off, these are fantasies. For 99.9% of Americans, you will never deal with a home invasion. And of the times when you do, the best thing for you to do, and I believe this sincerely, because I've actually had a house broken into by a gun, and first off, you might not even be awake, but the best thing to do is just let them have whatever they want. I mean this so sincerely. Let them have whatever they want, because again, you are so dramatically increasing the risk of somebody getting hurt by you trying to stop the robber. Most people who break in your home with a gun, with a gun, the last thing they want to do is use that firearm. They use the gun to make sure that they get in and out of your house without harm to themselves. Okay, what you should do is make sure they get in and out of your house without harm to themselves, because that's going to make sure that they don't feel the need to harm you. Then you know what you're going to do? You're going to wake up the next morning and be like, yeah, hey, insurance company, yeah, it turns out that home, the home alarm system or whatever we use, yeah, it didn't work out. Yeah, police didn't get here in response, but yeah, we filed the police report. Yeah, we got about $100,000 or whatever it is worth of personal insurance on this house. We lost about $30,000 worth of stuff. So yeah, how y'all gonna take care of this? Oh, you're gonna send us a check. Oh, and then we're gonna have to go shopping and replace things. Oh yeah, okay, thanks. See you later. Like, that's honestly, that should be the home defense plan for, again, 99.9% of Americans. At this point, like, that's just the reality. What is this? Oh, you keep a Glock under the pillow because this isn't the house to rob, and somebody comes in and comes after your wife's jewelry. You're gonna shoot them up style. I honestly just don't even think that's smart. Like, you're just really increasing your chances of dying over a goddamn necklace.
I'll ask some of my friends in the neighborhood who are in law enforcement.
Ask them. They're kind of biased. They're a pretty biased crowd, but
look, if one advantage they have is experience, right? They have to defend people. That's their job.
I gotta be honest with you. Honest cops, I think, would actually say the same thing. Because you know what I don't want to do as an honest cop? I don't even want the call. I don't want the call. The last thing I actually want is a call where I've got to come and show up, potentially to defend you, potentially to deal with an armed robber, to save your insured property. Your insured property. You people rarely have more that they lose in a robbery than they are insured for. So why do I, even as a police officer, want to put myself at risk over this? To defend your life? Maybe. To defend your wife's jewelry box? Probably not. So honestly, again, if they get in and out quickly and safely and you don't, guess what? We're showing up. Woo, woo, woo. Oh, damn, we showed up 20 minutes later. Unfortunately, it took them 10 minutes to rob you. Yeah, we're here to take a report. I know it don't roll like that, but come on.
Really? It's not always how you think. I grew up in a housing project. One of my friends in the housing project was this real tough dude. He looked after me. There's stuff I didn't know about him. He broke into a family's home, raped the mother. I think he raped one of the daughters too. He had held them at gunpoint. One of the daughters hid in the closet. She was the only one that survived because he never found her. Now, there's a bunch of us who knew him and liked him and couldn't believe he would do something like that. Well, about 20 years after the incident, after the murders, I spoke to the officer, one of the officers who worked the case. He says, I know that guy. He said that wasn't his only crime. He also broke into an old woman's house and assaulted her and beat her up horribly. Beat her. Not a gun. Beat her. You can't know when the door or the window is broken. You don't know what that person is willing to do.
No, I know you don't.
And if you're a police officer just trying to keep your own self safe, you don't. We deserve better than you. Period. And I bet you if you went around asking other police officers, they tell you the same thing. Like, yeah, like the reason the job pays so well. The reason you could be the top cop in in California and make more than $1 million a year is because supposedly you're a good administrator and you're willing to risk your life.
Yeah. But I'm just saying it just depends, right? Like I'm totally acknowledging people break in but I'm just saying if you actually find yourself being robbed for personal property, it is rarely a good idea to try to defend your personal property with a firearm. Now, if you're trying to defend your person with a firearm, that's a different story. And I am acknowledging you don't always know the difference. But in the situation where you talk about a person shooting somebody in the head after they took their wallet and they ran away because they turned around, to me, it's like, yeah, that person stole your wallet, but that shouldn't be a death sentence at this point. Because
the person should, but see, did that person have a right to your wallet? No, you don't know what that person's gonna do.
Again,
next.
I'm not saying I'm not saying he has a right to your wallet. If you could, I don't know why the person didn't stop him from taking their wallet, but assume the way it sounded was they had already taken the wallet. I'm just saying, I don't think you should have. I don't think that's self-defense, right? I think they took your wallet. Your wallet's already gone at this point. They're already, at this point, you now are more a threat to them than they are to you, because
they should have thought about that before they took his wallet.
Right, but I'd still probably, if I would imagine he still might. I guess he wasn't prosecuted.
He was not.
He was not prosecuted. Yeah, that's how people are. I think it's a little weird that Americans are comfortable with people getting shot over a wallet, but that's the law. Yeah. All right, let's keep going. Oh, I muted her because of her capitalism. All right.
To yourself, wow, I really don't want to cook dinner tonight. I'm exhausted.
She's still doing capitalism, gang.
It's really boy.
I should have known because she wasn't wearing the same thing. Here we go.
Not guilty, and they off your first Factor box. Thanks, Factor. So both of the shooters pled not guilty, and they will likely claim that they were acting in self-defense. In Missouri, the state has a stand your ground law. Stand your ground laws say that if you have a legal right to be in a place, in your home or elsewhere, then you have no duty to retreat, and you can meet force with force, including deadly force, so long as you reasonably believe it is necessary to prevent death or great bodily harm, or to prevent a forcible felony. And that's pretty broad. It applies to your home and elsewhere. It applies to feeling threatened.
And I'm just being honest, and y'all know, or may not know, I actually did work in a prosecutor's office, so I'm not totally bullshitting on this. But to me, and again, it's different. Every law is different, right? But if I was in even a stand your ground case, right, like I would say your friend this person has no duty to retreat, right? But you are not acting in a way that is preventing death or great bodily harm, or even to prevent a forcible felony if you shoot someone who has already robbed you, right? Because they're no longer a threat to cause you great death or bodily harm.
I disagree.
The felony has already been committed.
I disagree.
Yeah, we disagree about it in court. That's all I'm saying.
The guy, my friend, had no way of knowing if that person was armed.
Right, just like I don't think a cop can shoot an unarmed black man because he's in the act of committing a felony. Again, until he produces a weapon, right? Like what I would think your friend would have been doing, like if your friend would have said, the guy turned around and went to pull a gun on me, shoot him. As soon as you see him pulling a weepon, shoot him. If that, like, really, I would have been like,
I don't
shoot
remember
him.
him saying that.
But I don't. But all I'm just saying is, and again, I'm not saying. Maybe the guy would make a case, right? He could have made a case. I was scared. I thought the guy was going to shoot me. I was terrified that he was going to cause great bodily harm to me.
Why
wouldn't you shoot him terrified? In the head? Because it just sounded like it sounded like the robbery was already a case. And then you're yelling at the dude.
My friend's not Jason Bourne, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, I just wanted to touch on the law. But yeah, that would be
necessary to prevent death or great bodily harm, or to prevent a forcible felony. And that's pretty broad. It applies to your home and elsewhere. It applies to feeling threat not only of death, but also if you're afraid of bodily harm or a forcible felony like arson, kidnapping, or armed robbery. Basically, stand your ground laws are like souped up self-defense laws, and 30 states in the US have them. The key question is whether the person reasonably believed that there was a threat. And what's reasonable is pretty wishy-washy, especially when race is involved and a jury of your peers thinks that it was reasonable to fear a black kid in a hoodie. The question of who gets to stand their ground is an entirely different discussion. In New York, where the second shooting occurred, there is no stand your ground law, but the common law, or that judge-made law, does incorporate the castle doctrine, based on the idea that your home is your castle. So if you shoot an intruder, it's presumed self-defense. However, again, the key here is whether the shooter reasonably believed that the person entering their property was there to commit a crime. And what's reasonable is, again, wishy-washy, though the castle doctrine is far less broad than the stand your ground laws. It is still rooted, though, in this belief that you using force, including guns, for self-defense on your property is valid. And there are many in this country who believe that beyond the stand your ground laws and the castle doctrine, the Second Amendment guarantees this right, the right to own guns for the purpose of individual self-defense. And that idea has gained a strong foothold in mainstream American sentiment, but that hasn't always been true. So let's take a step back into history, shall we, to dissect the Second Amendment and how we got from that to wherever the hell it is that we are today. The Second Amendment says, as a reminder, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Which is an inherently confusing sentence, and thus we have been arguing about it for 2.5 centuries. But the writers didn't just come up with that out of thin air. They wrote those words in the historical context of the late 1700s and based on the ideas of political theorists who they relied upon to help them build what they believed to be an ideal republic. Also, despite recently winning a revolutionary war against them, they did rely deeply on English law to write the laws of this country. And in English law, the origins of the Second Amendment can be traced back to the late 16th century, when Queen Elizabeth I instituted a national militia in which individuals of all classes were required by law to take part to defend the realm. Some constitutional law scholars believe that the language of the right to keep and bear arms was included as a means to accomplish the objective of a well-regulated militia. Yes, in order to check federal tyranny, but also to bring constitutional balance by distributing the power of the weapons equally among the people, the states, and the federal government. Equally is, of course, in quotations because we all know that women and slaves were not included in this equation. And in the American colonies, there was a universal draft to local militias whereby men of all classes were required to maintain guns for the safety and defense of the state. And they didn't come up with that idea themselves either. The framers of the Constitution were highly influenced by various political theorists, for example, Niccolo Machiavelli, and his writings, including The Prince and The Art of War. In The Art of War, Machiavelli posits that soldiering should be the responsibility of every citizen, but the profession of none. He said military service should merge with the rights and responsibilities of citizenship, and said that there should never be any soldier who made war his only occupation. In Lawrence
Now, also, I just want to say there's a lot of countries like this throughout the world where some sort of service or being drafted or enlisted is literally expected of everyone.
Yeah, Israel's like that. Israel's like that.
Yes, I dated a girl from Israel, actually, and she could shoot an assault rifle, and it was terrifying to me. But she's like, oh, yeah, everybody does it. It's just a thing you do. You, like, sign up, you get in service. You get trained, you do your time, and then you dip out and go on about your life. Like, oh, cool.
Delbert Kress's article, An Armed Community, The Origins and Meaning of the Right to Bear Arms, Kress summarizes Machiavelli's position, saying citizens bore arms in defense of the state, motivated by a commitment to the common good and officered by the nation's most respected individuals. Machiavelli wrote that tyranny only happens when citizens allowed professional soldiers, unmoved by a sense of the common good, to subvert the military power of the state to their own self-interest.
All right, and gang, that is where you get Jay Bundy caught up in the only God I am willing to worship, and her name is Nuance. Because of, let's just face it, being black, and also in particular my advocacy in the war on drugs, I do have an issue with a state monopoly on violence, meaning I don't, while I do support the government's ability to disarm people, I don't support the government's right to unilaterally disarm the people. But I think there's a lot of that could mean anything, right? It certainly does not mean what it's been interpreted to mean as this sort of unrestricted right of the individual to own whatever fucking firearm they'd like to. But yeah, I'm not a freaking absolute state monopoly on lethality guy. That doesn't work for me either. Although not everybody agrees about that.
Hence, Machiavelli concluded, a good man would not make war his only profession. It is in this context that the framers wrote the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This amendment was also meant to protect against domestic insurrection. This is not just in theory. 4 years prior to the signing of the Bill of Rights, Shays' Rebellion, a citizen-led armed insurgency in Massachusetts, roiled the nation. The rebellion was squashed by the federal government, and the episode led many to push for a stronger central government at the Constitutional Convention in order to protect against such insurrections. Thus, concludes Kress, the second—
Or, gang, I just thought of the fucking J. Bundy legal philosophy on this shit right here, right? My one black friend, we do whatever the people want to do as far as regulating guns. And what I would support, I'm thinking in my head, is a more restrictive interpretation of the Second Amendment, where, just hear me out, it's just like the idea would be, let's say it's related to self-defense, sport, hunting, sales, transportation, whatever it is, right? That all falls under federal and state law, period, end of story, right? And the government can literally just do whatever is legal based on that, right? The Second Amendment to me then would only be something that basically you could hold up legally if it was related to basically fighting against domestic tyranny. If it was an example of, you needing to serve in that well-regulated militia role, right? Because that would be what we, because now we're dealing with what we call like a broad interpretation, where they literally cherry pick the last line. They're like, how at the end it says the government shall not impinge on somebody's ability to own firearms. Yeah, that's the Second Amendment. Just that part right there, right? That's a very broad interpretation. I'm arguing for something that be maybe incredibly narrow, where the government absolutely can regulate guns, and then you can lean on the Second Amendment, but you're gonna have to show. It's almost like where in a murder trial you'd have to establish that you were defending yourself, right? Or you'd have to be established that you weren't in your right mind. You just have to pass this Second Amendment test, basically, where you establish that it was related to what the Second Amendment is narrowly related to. Then you're good to go.
I kind of feel, if I'm interpreting your thoughts correctly, that on January 6th, Trump could have had a U-Haul loaded with guns and started passing them out to that crowd, and they could have broken into the Capitol, killed whoever they thought was necessary to swing the government to preserve Trump as president. You
know what? I'll play ball because it's our show and it's a hot program, right?
Yeah, hot.
Yeah, right? You're both right. I'm gonna be honest with you. I would say in that case, yes, they could argue that. Now, in this case, here's what I'm saying. I think would fail, right? Like it'd be like, no, you didn't have a reasonable case to think you were actually defending the Constitution, or actually, we can demonstrate that this was an insurrection or whatever, right? And so it's not actually to allow you to insurrection. It's to that
would have been the purpose.
But yes, I would have let them argue that. I would have, under this case, to play ball with you. Yes, that would have been something they'd been able to argue, and some of them, and it would have been a tough case because some of them would say, Trump says you got to fight and and then they get caught up in the details. But yeah, I would actually be okay with if they, because look, a lot of them were armed that day. That was the consideration of the police, right? The consideration of the cops when they said, why didn't you guys fire on them? Right? They said we didn't fire on them because we were pretty concerned that we were likely outgunned, right? So,
but you're likely outgunned by people who, generally speaking, do not know how to use the weapons.
And it should have, and it also should have come up in a lot of them, because if a lot of them got
shooting each other,
yeah,
the insurrectionists would have been shooting each other more so than the police.
And here's what's interesting about that: most of the people were picked up later, like they were charged later, right? But if they had been, let's just say they called in the National Guard and they called in everybody and they did whatever was necessary to arrest all them people on site, it would have been interesting, right? Because a lot of them would have had firearms. If that theory is correct, a lot of them would have had firearms, right? And automatically some stuff would have kicked in because they would have had firearms in the commission of a felony and all this other stuff, which automatically kicks up the seriousness of your charges. And so that same thing would have probably come out. From what I'm hearing, a lot more of it is they can't really prove any of that because, they didn't get them at the day, but they can charge them for being there or charge them for whatever they posted on social media and stuff like that. But yeah, under what I'm saying, that would be the test in court, and they would get to argue that. But because that would be what they were arguing, right? That's the case. You're right. January 6th was a day that would have been relevant. I don't think it would pass, but yeah. All I'm saying is, my one black friend, I think I think it's reasonable. Like, I think in a different world, we could reasonably have a majority of the Supreme Court who says, yeah, we're all about the Second Amendment, but the Second Amendment is about maintaining the people can maintain a well-regulated militia. Now, you shooting up a school, yeah, that ain't got nothing to do with a well-regulated militia. Yeah, you shooting somebody during a home invasion, that's up to the stand your ground laws in your state or blase and good noise, but it has nothing to do with maintaining a well-regulated militia. See what I'm saying? It wouldn't be a Second Amendment case. If you shot an intruder in your home, sure, it's down to whatever your state or laws are regarding home invasions and the use of firearms and home invasions. It's not a Second Amendment case under this narrow interpretation, right?
Second Amendment assured the people, through the agency of a well-regulated militia, a role in the preservation of both the external and internal security of the Republic. It did not guarantee the right of individuals, like Daniel Shays and his followers, to closet armaments. Guns, according to Kress, were understood by Republican political theorists at the time our Constitution was written to have a place in society only in service of the common good, and that access to arms was understood to be a communal rather than an individual right. In the years since the founding, the idea of citizenship being connected to militia service and commitment to the greater public good has been corroded and bastardized by American individualism, which has interpreted the Second Amendment to mean that people have the right to bear arms primarily for self-defense. And that idea has been legitimized by the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Second Amendment over the last 2 decades. And you can see this seismic shift in our individualism and how interpretation of the Second Amendment has changed through the Supreme Court cases about the Second Amendment. Prior to 2008, the Supreme Court hadn't heard a case about the Second Amendment since 1939. In that 1939 case, U.S. v. Miller, an Arkansas federal district court charged Jack Miller and Frank Layton with violating the National Firearms Act of 1934, also known as the NFA, when they transported a sawed-off double-barrel 12-gauge shotgun in interstate commerce. The NFA, passed in 1934, was the first federal gun control law in the United States. The two appealed, saying that the law violates their Second Amendment right to bear arms. The Supreme Court held that the Second Amendment does not guarantee an individual the right to keep and bear a sawed-off double-barrel shotgun. Writing for the unanimous court, Justice James Clark McReynolds reasoned that because possessing a sawed-off double-barrel shotgun does not have a reasonable relationship to the preservation or efficiency of a well-regulated militia, the Second Amendment does not protect the possession of such an instrument. And then for nearly 70 years, we had major shifts in U.S. culture, not least of which being the growth of the NRA's influence in D.C. But at the time of the passage of the National Firearms Act of 1934, the NRA was actually in favor of some regulation. In fact, the president of the NRA in 1934, Carl Frederick, testified before Congress saying, and I quote, "I have never believed in the general practice of carrying weapons. I seldom carry one. I do not believe in the general promiscuous toting of guns. I think it should be sharply restricted and only under licenses." The NRA backed further federal legislation, including the Federal Firearms Act of 1938 and the Gun Control Act of 1968, though they did oppose a national firearms registry. However, after the passage of the Gun Control Act of 1968, a growing faction of NRA gun rights activists began to shift the focus of the group onto politics, where before it had remained largely nonpartisan. The NRA founded its lobbying arm, the Institution for Legislative Action, in 1975 and created its own political action committee in time for the 1976 elections. The wing was helmed by Harlan Carter, who, along with his supporters, were against national gun regulation and believed that no compromise should be made on gun rights. Sound familiar? And in the years since 1975, the NRA has systematically lobbied to break down federal gun control laws and stop any new ones in their tracks. And then by the time the Supreme Court heard its next Second Amendment case in 2008, the societal conversation around guns had completely shifted. In District of Columbia v. Heller in 2008, Scalia, writing the opinion in a hotly divided 5-4 decision, recognized an individual right to possess firearms independently of service in a state militia and to use firearms for self-defense within the home. The court held that the first clause of the Second Amendment, that references a militia, is a prefatory clause that does not limit the operative clause of the amendment. So they said the operative clause of the amendment is the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Holy word games, Batman. But that is really fancy legalese for exactly what we said earlier, which is we're just going to take that last part right there and we're going to say that that's the Second Amendment. And that's exactly what they said. They said that operative, meaning that's the part that we are actually, that's what people are really, that's what they were really concerned. In other words, they really wanted to say the government shall not impede a person's ability to own firearms. And then the introductory clause that they just so happened to use was the bit about in order to maintain a well-regulated. Now, the reason that is word games is because that's not how the English language works. When you set up something and you say, for this intended purpose, that, in order to X, Y, then you are literally stating that the operative clause or phrase is for the purposes of the introductory part. And they are basically just stepping that with fancy words. And that's why it's a word game, because it just so much reminds me of Christian apologetics, where you start with your answer and then make up the interpretation as you go along.
And the words, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state was, I guess, just throwaway language. Because the text of the amendment should be read in the manner that gives greatest effect to the plain meaning it would have had at the time it was written, the court said that the operative clause should be read to guarantee an individual right to possess and carry weapons in case of confrontation. Scalia then cherry-picks some political writing that backs up his opinion, just like I've cherry-picked academic writing that backs up my opinion with Machiavelli. Do you see how messy this gets? You can find anything from history that will back up what you want to be true, which is exactly what the court did in this case. Justices Stevens, Souter, Ginsburg, and Breyer dissented, saying that the Second Amendment does not create an unlimited right to possess guns for self-defense purposes. Instead, the most natural reading of the amendment is that it protects the right to keep and bear arms for certain military purposes, but does not curtail the legislature's power to regulate non-military use and ownership of weapons. Justice Stevens argued that the amendment states its purpose specifically in relation to state militias and does not address the right to use firearms in self-defense, which is particularly striking that it left out the self-defense part because other similar provisions in state laws and constitutions at the time did specify use of guns for self-defense. So the fact that the framers of the Second Amendment did not mention self-defense is telling. Justice Breyer also wrote a separate dissent in which he argued that the Second Amendment protects militia-related, not self-defense-related interests, and it does not provide absolute protection from government intervention into those interests, pointing to historical evidence from the time of ratification, which indicates that colonial laws regulated the storage and use of firearms in the home. So regulations of guns in the home was normal at the time of the writing of the Second Amendment, because again, you can cherry pick pretty much anything from history to back up your claims, which is why there is no end in sight to the gun debate in the United States. A subsequent Supreme Court decision called McDonald v. City of Chicago from 2010 held that the Second Amendment's guarantee of the individual right to possess firearms applies to state and local governments as well as to the federal government, because the right to self-defense is fundamental to the nation's scheme of ordered liberty and deeply rooted in the nation's history and tradition, which, no, it's not. This was, again, a divided 5-4 decision, with Stevens, Ginsburg, Breyer, and Sotomayor dissenting. And then SCOTUS doubled down on this guns as self-defense narrative, most recently in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin in 2022, ruling that the Second Amendment guarantees an individual right to carry firearms outside the home for the purpose of self-defense, saying that the right to carry a firearm in public for self-defense is deeply rooted in our history, and that the number of gun deaths in this country is irrelevant to the issue. Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan dissented, saying states should be able to pass restrictions in order to curb the number of deaths caused by gun violence. So, as the Second Amendment stands today, based on Supreme Court interpretation, it protects an individual's right to own guns in the home and carry them outside the home for self-defense purposes, despite the fact that there is ample historical evidence that this idea of guns for individual self-defense is not deeply rooted in our history. In fact, the reason why people are so obsessed with guns seems to be an entirely new invention as of the 20th century, and at least based on my research, seems to be due in part to the powerful lobbying of the NRA and gun manufacturers and our government's ability to be easily bought out, plus deeply entrenched U.S. individualism and Christian fundamentalism. During the mid to late 1800s, the US was focused on expanding westward. You've heard the stories: the Wild West, the Gold Rush, the New Frontier, pioneers, immigrants, the Oregon Trail. Our entire lives, we've been spoon-fed this idea of manifest destiny and of the rugged frontiersmen who embody American ideals of rugged individualism and self-reliance, and of building the American dream out of nothing but the mud at the bottom of a riverbed. A lot of that, however, has been fabricated, given the old Hollywood treatment over the course of the 20th century. Westerns became popular, and the more sensationalized the story, the better. So the idea of the gunslinging cowboy has dominated our collective understanding of who we are as a country. But the reality is that many towns in the Wild West really just wanted settlers to move out there, so they wanted their towns to seem safe for people. So many towns required visitors to drop their guns at town hall, and then they could pick them up on their way out of town. The open carrying and slinging of guns in the American West is an invention of Hollywood and conveniently placed NRA propaganda. And we've eaten it up. Hook, line, and sinker. Wow. But that doesn't fully explain it either. For example, in the 80s and 90s, gun-based massacres in Australia, England, and Canada led those countries to massively crack down on gun ownership. Australia in particular is an interesting comparison. In 1996, Australia suffered a mass shooting rampage that killed 35 people. It was the worst mass shooting in the country's history, and it rocked the country to its core. Within a few months, the country had passed extensive gun reform laws, including a ban on automatic and semi-automatic weapons, a national firearm registration system, and a gun buyback program. Plus, people who wanted to own a gun had to prove a good reason to have one, and self-defense wasn't a good enough reason. This despite the fact that Australia had a powerful gun lobby and a vocal faction of rural voters and leaders who opposed gun reform, and despite the fact that gun laws were largely in the hands of Australian states, typically. And this despite the fact that Australia is also a land of immigrants who braved an even more horrifyingly harsh frontier, relying on rugged individualism and self-reliance to tame the continent. And yet they managed to get this passed. In the nearly 30 years since this gun reform, Australia has experienced a total of 3 mass shootings, and the rate of gun deaths per 100,000 people went from 2.84 to 0.9. For comparison, in the US, we have experienced 140 mass shootings in the 3.5 months since the start of this year. And our rate of gun deaths per 100,000 people is 13. Again, Australia's is 0.9. So rugged individualism doesn't fully explain it either. Which brings me to Christian fundamentalism. Part of the reason why Australia was able to pass these reforms is because they don't have anything in their constitution like our Second Amendment. And many countries like us do not revere their constitution in the way that we do. I had a French international law professor in law school who loved to criticize how Americans treat our constitution as this sacred cow, as she called it. And that's in part because of the deeply entrenched ethos of Christian fundamentalism.
All right. This video is on fire. I'm really enjoying this, and you know, the NRA propaganda gang. What can you say? I mean, you laid out a beautiful case there. I think a lot of us do associate that with the current situation. It almost speaks for itself. I'm realizing problems with individualism, but yeah, I think a lot of us have bought into that narrative, and it's kind of like, what we're saying when people have this fiction. Even now, the modern version, I think, is the good guy with a gun, right? It's not necessarily the cowboy ethos, but it's the same drama playing out for people, right? They are, the person who needs to be armed because, God forbid, somebody go crazy while they're at the grocery store. They're gonna be there to, take down the assailant. And to me, that does tie into the same mentality as the cowboy narrative and what we call main character syndrome. Uncle Bobby talks about this too, where, like my one black friend, what you talked about with your experience at the range was so interesting because it highlights how difficult it really is to shoot a firearm effectively without training and experience. And that is when you are in the safety and security of a shooting range, right? This good guy with the gun fantasy relies on you're under pressure, you're actively shooting out an active shooter, and now under potential fire, you're gonna go SWAT team mode. And I just don't think it's gonna play out like that for most people.
No, I think they'll, under the stress of it, they'd probably cower and present more of a danger to innocent people than those who are committing whatever crime is taking place.
100%. Also, I think, they're also certainly, I think, putting a target on themselves, right? If I'm a mass shooter and I'm picking off random targets, or if I'm a shooter with an axe to grind, and there's certain people I have feelings about, and if I see them, I'll pick them off, depends on the circumstance. You increase your probability now above all of that, right? Because if I'm looking for people not you, when you pull a gun on me to try to play hero, well, now you're my first and primary and only target. And if I'm picking off people at random, and again, you present yourself to me with a firearm, you just became a whole hell of a lot more likely for me to shoot than random. So, I think it's probably a better idea to just get yourself out of there safely, like everybody else is trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Rooted in the founding of this country. We revere the founding fathers as ordained with special, almost godlike powers. We are taught about the Constitutional Convention as this coming together of great minds, and the writing of the Constitution, this literally superhuman feat of ingenuity. In her book, The Cult of the Constitution, legal scholar and all-around badass Marianne Franks draws a parallel between Second Amendment absolutism and Christian fundamentalism, pointing to the fiery passion that evangelicals, Puritans, and fundamentalists feel towards the Bible and the Word of God, while often cherry-picking the parts of it that back up their beliefs and ignoring the rest. You see similar rhetoric. If you criticize the Second Amendment, then you have desecrated the Constitution itself. And if you critique the Founding Fathers, then you hate America. The Constitution is holy scripture, written by Founding Fathers ordained by God. And if you don't blindly support it, then you're met with this hyperbolic, emotionally charged reaction from people who believe in the Constitution based on their faith, as opposed to on the level of logic and reason.
Exactly, gang. And we're just trying to make some edits.
See that on repeat ad nauseum in my alt-right TikTok reaction series, just people screaming about the Second Amendment as though it is the word of God, and about the Constitution as though it is a holy text. All this from people who are so faithful to the Constitution, but have never actually read it. And certainly haven't read the 250 years of Supreme Court opinions interpreting it either. They're just up in their feelings about what they think.
It?
Sure.
Can you pause it? So I just want to go to the preamble of the Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. So let's just focus on that. More perfect. They didn't say perfect.
Right.
If somebody thought what was in place before was perfect, this is supposed to be even better. I really feel that this is the duty of government, to make it more perfect, with the understanding we will not achieve perfection.
Right.
And the goal is to make this the best place it can be for its citizens, which means you're not going to be able to do everything you want.
Right.
If some of the stuff you want is if it subtracts or detracts from the rights of other people. There's a line there. We've all heard it. My right to swing my fists ends at your nose.
Yeah.
You know, I just don't have a right to just slug you for no apparent freaking reason. Anyway, it goes on. Establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Do ordain and establish the Constitution for the United States of America. So, gun related here, we have provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare. I would say it probably falls under that. And maybe to some degree ensure domestic tranquility. We don't have that anymore.
Right.
We don't have that anymore. I think her connecting it to Christian fundamentalism, I wonder if that's not a little unfair to Christians. Though I still think Jesus is a fictional character, I don't believe we have any records of him carrying a gun. You know, he didn't have an AR-15. He had the sword of his mouth, allegedly, but no gun.
I do think it's fair. But go ahead.
Okay, well, her point is they cherry pick, right?
Right.
They tell you about the parts they like about, and then the parts they don't like, you don't hear about that from them.
Right.
I think I've watched a lot of Jordan Klepper interviews. I do Klepper, Klepper. I do encourage other people to watch him when he interviews NRA, people at the NRA convention. And it's clear that they don't have a deep understanding of the gravity of the abuse that people perpetuate with guns. Probably most of those people he speaks with rarely ever even fire the gun they own.
Right.
We saw a moment ago that guy who was president of NRA. He didn't always carry a gun. He didn't think it was necessary. You know, he obviously didn't think much of the act of walking around with a gun on you all the time. I would be willing to believe that's where most NRA people are. And I think what's really at hand, just like for the Christian, if I'm going to equate the two, the average Christian does not want to lose a right to practice their faith. And the average Christian has little to no idea of what they actually say or what Christianity actually includes, right? It's they know what the box look like, but they don't know what's in the box.
Right.
No, I carry that around with me. Do you know what's in it? I know some of the contents. So I think the same is true for most gun owners, with the exception that I have to reframe it a little bit. They never intend harm with the weapon that they own. Never. My friend he competes in these contests with pistols and all this stuff like that. He doesn't want to shoot anybody. He likes shooting his gun at targets, but he doesn't want to kill a person.
Right.
He doesn't want to maim a person or wound a person. Now he's got the skill level. If he's a CHP, if he's a LAPD or Orange County PD, and he has to shoot somebody, he's good enough to say, okay, I'm just going to shoot this guy in the kneecap. I'm going to shoot him in his hand so he can't fire a weapon at me. Make it safe for the people around us.
Right.
So that guy he doesn't have the mindset to where he's a individual who wants to take somebody out. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, there are people who work in law enforcement, just as there are people who work outside of law enforcement. That's exactly what they want. They want to kill people. The military turns such people away when they can figure out who they are before they get in. Right. My neighbor who works for the Santa Monica PD, he goes, we turn people away. He goes, there's some people I wouldn't want them on the force with me. And he said to me, like, you wouldn't either. If you knew what was up in their minds, like, no, that person doesn't have the mindset to do this job. So I think it's not fair to vilify those who are promoting the Second Amendment. Oh, we should be able to own guns if we choose to. Klepper also did a special, I think it was a 2-part special, where he talked to gun owners, and remarkably, they were in favor of some regulation because they realized irresponsible people will take something. Christians can say this too. Irresponsible people will take what they love and abuse it, and they will use it to abuse other people.
Sure. I'm just saying, I think that the commentary is that, because I wouldn't say it's about demonizing believers, but it's about recognizing, one, that this is a different interpretation, because it's just like the Bible, where you're talking to people who mostly haven't read the Bible, and they're telling you what's biblical, but they haven't actually read it. And then the similar comparison, and I don't know how and it's frustrating me that people ignore this, that these are fundamentally Christian people and Christian organizations that hold this stuff up, and they do, in fact, treat the founding fathers in the Constitution like it is a holy document inspired by God, the same way the same way with the biblical authority. And it's the reason we can't modernize the Constitution. So I think, I do think it's fair to call out the way they're treating it, because you're not calling out their religion. You're just saying, hey, we shouldn't be treating the Constitution like it was written by holy men. And in fact, we are. And in fact, it's primarily Christian organizations that are doing it. So that's, because to me, that's a big part of the problem. Like it's they're not listening.
Well, look, for the person who's waving the Constitution around like it's a holy document, name me 6 people who signed the Constitution. Name me 6.
Right.
Just 6.
Right.
Name me 6 prophets in the Bible. Name me 6 of Jesus's disciples. Actually, I'll lower that. Name me 4.
Right.
So people don't know these things as well as they say they do. What is powerful is the idea. And that's something we have to understand. If you are a Christian or whatever your faith practice is, if you are a non-believer, if you are agnostic, you don't know if anybody can know. It's the idea. That's where the real power is. The real power to get people to do something, to start something, to stop something, to change, is in the idea. So for gun laws to change, the ideas that replace the old ideas have to be good, and then they have to be communicated. I'm not someone who sits here and says I can solve the whole gun problem by making guns illegal to own. That won't do it, because it has been pointed out by many people. Well, the bad guys realize, well, shoot, I'm not going to turn my gun in, I'll keep it. Now fewer people have guns, so fewer people can stop me. I can get away with more crap.
But I don't think anybody's really arguing to eliminate gun ownership so much as we're arguing to regulate gun ownership, and we're saying especially enshrining it in a way that isn't consistent with its original interpretation isn't helping us.
Okay, and I'm not good at tracking the chat. I know Carrie Ann, hi Carrie Ann, has put a lot of comments in here that I've not broken up our conversation enough to mention. But maybe you and some people in the chat can make some suggestions. What is here's a question to answer, if you all will. Without taking away any guns, not a single gun, how can we improve the law?
I mean, there's a lot of that, but why aren't we taking away guns?
Again, because there's people who don't want that. When I watch these Republicans get pinned down, Jon Stewart asked some guy, and I don't know who the guy was, what is the leading cause of deaths of children in the United States of America? And the guy didn't want to acknowledge, like, it's guns. Kids can't even own guns legally in any state, right? Or maybe there's some state where they can. There's 50 of them. But typically, a 9-year-old is not allowed to own a firearm. They're not allowed to carry a firearm. Now, the Boebert family photo, they have guns, whatever. And I disagree with that. But typically, they don't walk around with their own firearms on the hip. If you live, like I live out in the desert, if you live somewhere even more remote than I do, and there's Mojave green rattlesnakes out there that will end your life. Like whatever they bite, you can't keep. It has to be cut off if you want to survive. I get it if a 9-year-old has been taught how to use a gun and walk around their property with that gun on. I get it, but that kid shouldn't be bringing it to school. So we can pretty much agree that, kids shouldn't have guns. We can pick an age. They just shouldn't have guns. Now, what are we going to do about adults? What if somebody's mentally unstable? What if they have a violent crime, a past of violent crime? Not if they smoked a joint, not if they took a pee in the corner of some park when they thought nobody was watching. Not that. What if somebody legitimately has robbed a bank, or they were a spouse abuser or something like that, or sex offender? We can take their right to have a gun away. But what can we do? How do we reframe?
But can we really do that? Really? I don't support that. Because I think a lot of these people are vulnerable and they're targets. And when people become targets, they actually have we have reason to suspect they might need to protect themselves more than other people.
Like which people?
Any of these groups of people that you just said we're comfortable taking gun rights for. Again, that's why I don't support gun rights.
A person who abuses their spouse should be allowed to have a gun.
To the extent that if a person is known for that and they move into a neighborhood and that might make them a target for violence. How do I know?
No, look, you can, there are tools in the county of Los Angeles. You can look up and see what crimes are committed in your neighborhood. And there are registries where people who've committed some crimes, such as like like a child abuse. And I think there's something else that you can look up and see what crimes they've committed. Like who's in your neighborhood? Who are these people in your neighborhood? They have to register, some of them, where they live.
Right.
So you may be able to know that someone was convicted of spousal abuse or child abuse and get the details of the case.
Right. And if if you also know that person can't own a firearm because of these things, then who's your safest target for home invasion?
Well, is a person who is a nefarious person who's going to break into someone's house, right, and threaten their life, or like a home invasion, like you're saying, are they seriously thinking this person who already, let's take the spousal abuser, they already beat up their spouse, they have no reverence for you when you break in their house? They can still own kitchen knives, they can still own baseball bats, and they probably still own a gun. If they used a gun before, they probably still do. And if you want to invite death, that's a fantastic way to do it in my eyes. You're presenting yourself to another person who's more criminal than maybe you were if you're the person doing the home invasion. This person clearly didn't give an F.
I just don't think that's going to happen, right? Because that puts too many cops and military personnel on that list. But yeah, let's go ahead and finish this. I think we're actually close to wrapping. She's almost close to done.
I think it says and what they think it stands for. That the way it mirrors Christian fundamentalism and frankly cult-like behavior is unnerving, and it explains the willingness to cling to this Second Amendment despite all evidence pointing to the fact that it is tearing apart our country and our democracy. Like, make it make sense, okay? And there are common sense things that we could be doing as a country at a federal level that would likely comply with the Constitution, though probably not under this Supreme Court. Specifically, we could implement a licensing system whereby anyone who wants to buy a gun has to do a background check, get their fingerprints taken, and pass a test. I mean, we make people get a license before they can drive a car. It's absolutely batshit crazy that we don't do that for people who want to buy a literal AR-15 semi-automatic rifle, the most popular gun for mass shooters. This wouldn't solve all of our problems, but it would certainly make it harder to get your hands on a gun, especially reducing impulse gun purchases, because obtaining a license can take weeks. For example, Connecticut implemented a licensing system back in 1995 and saw a reduction in gun homicides and suicides as a result. And this would be supported by American voters everywhere. According to one 2019 poll, 68% of people who live in homes where they have guns are in favor of a gun licensing system. And 77% of US voters generally support a licensing system. This is, as with many issues we talk about here in America, an issue of a very vocal minority controlling the narrative, which is, again, a thing the framers of the Constitution were very wary of: minority rule. And yet, we have a gun lobby spending millions every year to influence and buy out our politicians, the NRA, which has been creating pro-gun propaganda for decades, and far-right platforms like Fox News and its many pundits constantly fear-mongering, telling their people that they want to take our guns away. And that type of fear-mongering and the real fear that happens after mass shootings are really good for business. Gun sales go through the roof after mass shootings. It is very important for the NRA, the gun manufacturers they represent, and the talking heads and politicians that they buy out to keep the American people absolutely terrified, because it sells more guns. And in a world where other major economies like England, Australia, and Canada have all imposed strong gun laws, America is the final frontier for continuing to line their pockets, while the rest of us are out here literally and reasonably afraid for our lives if we make a mistake and accidentally drive up the wrong driveway, open the wrong door, or ring the wrong doorbell. Reminder to grab my free YouTube Get Started.
All right, gang. So, that was a good video, and part of that's part of my take on disarming Americans is to lower the temperature in the room, and sort of like get away from this narrative that there's just so much crime and so much government tyranny that you never know when you're gonna need to defend yourself. I just think most of these situations, fortunately, are incredibly rare. Most of the time, resorting to firearm violence, like in the case of a home invasion, doesn't really help much. In the case of we've rarely heard stories of it even helping in something like a mass shooting. Most mass shootings are ended when the police get there and the professionals, take care of the situation. Most other people are better off getting out of harm's way and getting other people out of harm's way as best they can. So that sort of reality check, because that would make people think twice about it. It's really asking people, okay, so you want to own this gun for self-defense, let's think about, it's like this, gang. When you get your medical, it's funny you mentioned marijuana earlier. When you get your medical marijuana license, you do have to even then go through this shit. You have to meet with the doctor. They sit you down. And, if you think, hey, I just would like to smoke some reefer once in a while, yeah, because I like it or whatever, that's not a good enough reason. There's a list of approved conditions, and everything else is see you later. And then on top of that, they're letting you know, do you know about all of the best ways to use? Do you know about the ways that are better to use than smoking? Do you know about the health concerns and all of this stuff? And they're kind of running you through that. And that's kind of the thing that I would like to be part of a responsible gun ownership culture. Because a real responsible gun ownership culture, right, again, to me is very narrow. It teaches you things like, yeah, you're good to use your gun for self-defense if you think using your gun is going to prevent, grave bodily harm or potentially your death or somebody to commit a felony on you. But you might not be protected if you shoot somebody who already robbed you in the back, right? Because, okay, now you got to think twice about it. Then you got to show them the statistics of, how many people, end up getting killed, quote unquote, trying to defend themselves against a firearm with a firearm versus how many people, lose a little bit of property but walk away unharmed because they don't have a firearm on them. You start looking at the real numbers, and not only do you think twice about using a firearm, you might think twice about even owning one, because you might legitimately run yourself through the scenarios like I do. Unfortunately, like I said, I don't have it. I don't have to worry about it. But look, if a mass shooting breaks out in the grocery store, yeah, I'm not going to go for my gun. If I'm the victim of a home invasion, yeah, I'm probably not going to own a gun. Somebody says something disrespectful to my girl, yeah, I'm probably just going to pull her out of there and get the hell out of Dodge. Probably not going to use my firearm. Now, is that to say you would never find me in a situation where I actually think, yeah, I could sit here and give you a laundry list of fantasies where I would use a firearm. But for me, fortunately, they tend to be far more improbable situations. Most situations, they can get me killed. Even just being black, right? Like being black, you're like, it's not really a good idea to own a firearm. It's not a good idea to have one in your car, right? Because if you're black, even if you legally own the firearm, we know you having a legal firearm on your possession when you get pulled over by a cop is way more likely to get you killed by a bad cop actor than it is to save your life, right? When you start to realize home accidents, who are the most victims of, right? In other words, when you own a firearm, you're way more likely to harm yourself. If you have a child or somebody else in the home who gains access to the gun, it's way more likely that they harm themselves. So to me, we would actually have far fewer guns and far fewer gun incidents in this country if we actually depicted a more accurate perception with people about the realities of gun ownership and gun usage.
I want to read some of the comments here
since
I did ask.
Oh, yeah, sure.
First, look at the trees. Name 6 amendments other than the second. I cannot. We go down to, okay, AR says that Jesus didn't sign the Constitution. Also true. Look at the trees, says training and education. I think I wish I had more context for that comment. However, I'm wondering if it didn't reference maybe the next comment from Look at the Trees. I was hunting for food and carrying a shotgun at 9. I killed my first deer at 9. So that's sort of an old-timey, if you will, explanation of why I think that it's not bad that people own guns. If this country ever goes to crap, or the world ever goes to crap, and people have to return to hunting for their own food, and some do now, like preppers and stuff like that, it's not bad to have those skills,
Sure.
And that acumen. But
ironically, though, responsible gun ownership for hunting often precludes the way you would handle a firearm for self-defense. In other words, if you're primarily thinking about self-defense, the problem is you keep loaded guns within close access, a place where you always have access to it or you can get to it very quickly. When you safely own a gun for hunting, first off, you don't own the type of gun you normally use in self-defense, the scenario. It's usually kept away from where anybody has access to it. Typically, the gun and the ammo are kept separately, right? And so if somebody breaks into your house, you're not going to be able to, like, hang on, honey, I got to go to the garage and grab the rifle, sit there and start loading shells into your shotgun. It's not going to work like that. So again, we're fine with that. But this is what I mean about sensible. Most of us would be fine because we would start talking about what are the reasonable guns to have for self-defense. How do you keep a gun close on hand for self-defense? We'd probably limit that to certain types of weapons. You keep it, maybe you have to keep it in a safe under your bed or in the room, whatever. That's fine, right? Then your hunting guns need to be stored elsewhere, okay? You probably can't get an AR or M5 or anything like that without certain training or certain needs. Otherwise, they are at the range. And again, you could still own it, just like there are a lot of things like, a cigar locker or certain things about a boat or whatever that you own, but you only have access to during certain times and in certain places. You can't just land a helicopter anywhere on Earth because you feel like it, just because you own the helicopter. You have to be at a safe helipad or a field, or right, there's some control there. And it'd be the same thing. You want to own an AR-15, cool, but an AR-15 you only shoot at the range, right? Or you only shoot at the gun lodge, or you only shoot in special places because there's no reason for you to have one in your home, right? Like that, well, look, to me would all be part of the conversation.
I'm going to remember this wrong, but you'll get the gist of it. There was a rather high-ranking Japanese soldier who commented around the time of World War II, we can't invade America because hiding behind every blade of grass is a gun. Meaning there's so many guns, people can have guns. You have an invasion army in Southern California, they're not getting past Compton.
Right.
They're not. Because those people have better stuff than some military people do. They're just the gang members over there. You're just not. So Carrie Ann had many comments, and thank you so much, Carrie Ann. Thank you all. Limit the number per person, increase the requirement of ownership, ban any personal carry, including police patrols. I don't know about that.
Yep, I've always now that's one people don't always think go to. But yeah, even in there's a lot of policing contexts where a gun might be considered a special weapon. And so you mean you don't really need a gun to be a meter maid. You don't need a gun. There's a lot of policing you can do without a gun.
I'll agree with that. I know that's true.
Yeah.
Look at the trees commented. That was after I completed the safety course. I'm wondering if that's after the first deer were shot and killed. Carry on again. Mandatory lock storage or confiscation and revoking of license, or more revoking definitions. Look at the trees. In Ohio, if you commit domestic violence, they take your guns.
Yep, they do in many states.
Look at the trees again and separate the two parties involved. Carry in. Place gun bans in the hands of small government like dry counties. Okay, so some counties, dry county is a county where the sale of alcohol, sale and consumption, I think, maybe it's just the sale is forbidden. I don't know if consumption is, but that's possible too. Look at the trees. Some pieces of pipe, and I can make a gun. The stuff in your kitchen, my gosh, if you only knew, is pretty dangerous. Carrie Ann, voted for by the people directly affected by the law, giving better coverage of appropriate laws based upon area. I do like this breaking down by, let's say, community or city or county, that sort of thing. For instance, you can go to Las Vegas and prostitution is legal. It's not legal everywhere, and it shouldn't be legal everywhere. But if you have it legal in some places, that's probably for the best, because the standards for workers can be, okay, here's the minimum standards that have to be met, and you can regulate it more, and it doesn't get out of hand.
So yeah,
and you don't have people dying over it.
Yeah, for me, that's the silver lining here, and I would wrap up on this. I just say, like, for me, that starts with something that's actually attainable. Maybe not with the current court, but to me, it is attainable to redeem a Supreme Court that has a narrower interpretation of the Second Amendment as really being related to, issues of maintaining a well-regulated militia. Even, yes, if that means we have to hear January 6th defendants use, the what we'd probably call the Second Amendment test or the well-regulated militia test in their claims. Again, I think it would fail, but that would become a result of that. But yeah, to your point, that opens up the door for us to break it down a little bit more, for us to actually make federal and state and local laws that essentially determine how guns are regulated in all these other areas that are not necessarily related to the Second Amendment under the strict or original interpretation. But that's the problem now. If we continue to treat it as a biblical text where God came down and said all Americans should have the unrestricted right to have firearms for their own personal use, it's hard. It's gonna be hard to do that as it continues to be.
I'll read a few more comments.
Sure.
Just a few more. Lena. Yeah, Carrie Ann, I was thinking state by state or even country by country, but that carries its own risks. Any of these, no matter what regulation you put in place, of course, it carries its own risk. Everything has its ramifications. Carrie Ann, me too, and bombs from toilet cleaners. That's my comment about the kitchen. I think she's referencing that. Let's see. Technically, Mentos dropped in Coke is a bomb too. Okay. Look at the trees. Yeah, Carrie Ann. Lena, 100% from Carrie Ann. AR, Texas laws are insane now. As soon as I did my concealed handgun license, they went to open carry legal, and shortly after it did away with licenses altogether. I think Florida has something going on similar to that right now. Carrie Ann, I learned it all in my teens, just being a kid in the country. Look at the trees. I can't see you in chat at Lena. Lena, they look at the trees, can't see you in chat. I think Lena might be a hot program or my One Black Friend channel. Oh, I think they think Lena might be on my channel.
Oh yeah. They're on
commenting
different channels.
from
they're different channels. They come from different channels.
Okay.
Yeah, but I was just gonna say, I think it's interesting. Like I was thinking about growing up. My stepdad hunted, and I don't think the hunting rifle or whatever was kept in the house. And I do, if I remember correctly, think he owned firearms for protection. I cannot tell you where they were. And I think it'd be nice if that standard were ubiquitous, right? Rather than teenagers being able to bring where a responsible gun owner may not want, a responsible probably says, I don't even want my child to know where the guns are, right? And I can grow up and say, where did my stepdad keep the guns? I don't know. I can't tell you. Right? Like I could, right? Because that means I couldn't have accessed it if I wanted to, because I didn't even know where it was.
Okay.
That's clearly not the case in a lot of these households.
Let's see, Carrie Ann. Unfortunately, many don't know how to respond because, fortunately, they have not had that reason. Oh, I think I skipped something. Look at the trees.
Yeah, that's what we're responding.
It's talking about mass shootings. First, seek cover that will stop bullets in a mass shooting. Then seek your escape route. If you see the shooter, shoot them. If not, get the F out.
Right. Yes.
Now, bullets are fairly sophisticated these days, and you can't be sure. Like, I got a wall in front of my house. It might stop a bullet, but that's because it's solid concrete. It's like 7.5 inches thick of concrete.
Right, but that's a really good. Okay.
But not. It might not stop a 50 cal.
Right, but that's kind of there's a broader point there too about just any form of self-defense, even if it's hand-to-hand combat, is you're really seeking an exit. So
yes,
again, the responsible gun owner isn't at the grocery store when the shooting breaks out and then decides to take his gun and go look for the bad guy to take him out. It's more about, I'm trying to get up out of here safely, and if I happen to need to take a shot at the perpetrator to get out of here safely, then I'll do that, right? But that, again, that's not what we're being taught, right? The good guy with the gun is the guy who plays John Wayne Hero and saves the day by seeking out the gunmen and shooting them down. It's not a person who has a concealed firearm and ends up shooting the gunmen because they were trying to run out of the store and happen to run into them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's Liberty Jackson, new name to me. Welcome, Liberty Jackson. QOD, liberal Christians are unfortunately not in a position to oppose Christian nationalism. If you study the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979, I can see that happening. Liberty Jackson continues. The capitalists think that they can control Christian nationalism, but they will not be able to control it once it gets power. I would argue it already has. Carrie Ann, those understanding of killing has different meanings to those who kill their own food too. Oh, that's true. I've often said after eating elk, if I see an elk, I'm going to kill it. It's really good. Really good food. They're delicious. Yeah. It's the best meat I've ever had. Just like the socialists thought they could control the Islamists in Iran, they were wrong. Carrie Ann says, who has killed something bigger than their hand before? It's not something you do lightly. 1,000%.
Yeah.
1,000%. Carrie Ann, I'll even tell you, the ants that are on my property and other bugs, as long as I don't see them on concrete, I leave them alone. I don't even spray the soil, the ground. Like, no, they're not on the concrete. They're not trying to get in the house. As far as I'm concerned, we can live in harmony. But yeah, something bigger than your hand is where. Yeah, I don't want mice in here. I don't want rats in here. They gotta go. And I don't have a safe way for them to get out if they get in.
Yeah.
Let's see. Carrie Ann says, since I'm quoting Carrie Ann, there's pride in a good kill causing the least harm or stress. So I think that means
they're talking about hunting.
making. Yeah, like if you kill a deer, you're not making it suffer, spending 30 minutes there watching it bleed slowly. You know.
Yeah, none of us have issues with hunting. But yeah, I want to wrap this up. Do you have concluding thoughts on this?
I would say keep this in conversation because the best ideas are probably yet to come, and I think we as a nation want this resolved. I don't think most people want to do nothing, even those who are most fearful of being hurt in general, not just by someone with a gun. Those, the kids going to school, people shopping at the mall, wherever. I think most people want something done. They want a solution, and the solution cannot be we do nothing. The solution cannot be we change nothing, because all we can expect is more of the same if that's all we get.
Yeah. And I also just think I think guns should just be dirty. Like, I think they've gotten too much glorification. People are too into them. The photographs with them, the bragging about what guns you have, you know, all of that stuff is, to me, it just should just be seen as in poor taste. It's interesting that when you go to the grocery store, any of the swimsuit magazines or anything that could be potentially revealing or show too much skin is put in the back of the grocery store. If it's carried there at all, it's in the back of the magazine rack. But guns and ammo, right, is always in the front row where everybody can see it. You know, like that says a lot about the way a country sees guns. So yeah, I think those of us that, even if you own guns, just getting people to understand that, just like they shouldn't be whipping their private parts out in public and bragging about them, it's probably in poor taste to be boasting of your personal lethality in good company. But yeah, that's my take on it, and thanks so much for my one black friend. This was fun. I don't know how many good national conversations we'll have about guns, but this was an interesting one, and appreciate all you guys. As always, take care of yourselves
and each other.
All right,
and watch the movie 3,000 Years of Longing. It's excellent.
Nice. We're linked up in Gather Gang. I don't know how active I'll be for the next week or so because I'm moving and I need to break down the studio, and I'm not sure how long it'll take me to get me moved and set it back up. But don't worry, that's what's going on. If you don't see me for a little bit, it's because we're taking care of the move. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Otherwise, come hang out with us and gather. That'll be the way to stay connected. Love you guys. We'll see you soon. Poof.
See you soon. Bye.